So, you've heard about entanglement, right? How they say that particles can become entangled such that they can seem to interact with and communicate with each other from any distance instantaneously. Yeah, you've heard about that. Or most of you. Or a lot of you, I guess. Who am I talking to? The whole world? Because actually the minority of the whole world's probably heard about it. But some of you have heard about it, some of you haven't. And maybe some of you are reacting like what I'm thinking might be a more appropriate response to the consideration of entanglement than what the average person who hears about that displays for their reaction. Wherever I was going with that. Okay, so like let's start over maybe-ish. You've heard about entanglement. Oh, so that, right, the reaction. Okay, so then what's with, wow, really? What? Oh, that's weird. Huh? Instantaneously? No matter how far apart you put them? Really? How do they know for sure, you know? So like that. Then you go in, maybe for those of you who took it further, then you go find out kind of how they know, or how they know. And you look into it and you see you see to your satisfaction that it's true. Okay? You buy into it after you see enough certain type of people talk about it, and certain institutions are claiming that it's so, and certain awards have been given to people for it. Whatever it takes for you to be convinced that indeed this is a natural phenomenon of the universe, as certain as rainbows and rain. What I don't get is for the people in that position who are at that point where they totally believe this is true, I don't get how come they're not like, oh my gosh, what? Any distance? Instantaneously? No. That's impossible. I refuse to accept or to allow that to be true. That's not the way I understand things to be. I didn't set it up that way. That's not okay with me. That makes zero sense. Does effect precede cause all of a sudden? Have I been lied to about everything forever? Has everyone been deluded? Forever ago, for all time. What? Are we made out of magic? This isn't just a small discovery. This is a game changer. Non-localism, some of the scientists and stuff call it, or non-local behavior. Because local behavior tends to have to do with things push on each other in a stream of events, a concatenation of events. This does that, cause and effect. Makes sense physically, connecting through some medium, you know, because is it atoms pushing together, or are there forces in between the atoms that are causing that together? But still, those forces in that part of space-time are between those atoms and these atoms and stuff. So they have this connected medium, like the gravitational waves that go through the medium and stuff they talk about. Those waves are still, you know, crescent troughs and or shiftings in the fabric, and however many layers and how many are on top of each other and stuff, in what direction so they all go in and stuff like that. But this stuff, and so that light can travel through these things and different variations of the electromagnetic spectrum. But in entanglement, we're talking about instantaneous communication, regardless of distance between them. There might as well be no distance between these things. They also talk about it in terms of you can't describe one of these things or something as its own thing, independent of the other thing. It'd be like trying to say, you know, you're your torso or something, or you're half your body would be probably maybe more fitting if the other particle is the other half, you know. And the two particles that get entangled, are they exactly alike in every single way? All their spins, all their quirks, everything, you know? Or is it that we're not necessarily entangling clones of each other, we can entangle anything, and that perhaps maybe even naturally all things are somehow entangled and so forth. And so what would that be? What, you know, fill in the blank. How can, if you turn this one particle over here clockwise, this other one, or the other one turns counterclockwise at the same time, they say. Well, is it really at the same time, or is it just so fast that they can't tell the difference between how fast it is and infinitely fast? Their measurements aren't precise enough. It's actually just cooking it fast between these distances that we've tested and stuff. And so this assumption that it goes on to any distance is false. But there's math involved and other reasons to suggest that it's across any distance too, not just the verifications of a few tests or several tests that have been done that where it's been verified. What is it that gets... that causes this thing, you know, is it even a cause? I mean, just like stop trying to make too many assumptions along the way if you want to get there, maybe. You know, perhaps. But this one you spin, this one spins the other way from a googleplex light years, the distance light travels in a year at approximately 186,282 miles per second, instantaneously. Are they in the same place? Is everything everywhere in one spot? Is the singularity still here? And it just doesn't look like it or something? We're still in the singularity, just as sure as we are infinitely spread out or whatever? And is all matter and existing things so forth inside of kind of a super X of any shape or whatever, but it's this one thing, this globule around which there's a dark immensity? And would it be dark? Immensity of endlessness and distance of nothingness, not even energy, you know, maybe not even nothing or something like that? Or does this matter and energy through which these mediums travel and things travel go on forever and beyond forever? That it'd have to be beyond infinity. It'd have to be to even reach infinity and so on and stuff like that already. And so therefore there are infinite stars and there are infinite keyboards or infinite things or whatever-ish. And yet, if you had an infinite number of anything, wouldn't that fill up any space no matter how big, except maybe infinite? So why aren't stars everywhere? Why aren't birds everywhere if there are infinite birds? Or planets, or atoms. Why aren't there the same atoms everywhere? Infinite hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, all of them. Why aren't they infinite? And if they're infinite, why aren't they filling up everywhere? Well, maybe if the answer is because infinity is so big you can't fill it up, then how come infinity is not so big it spreads out an infinite distance between any two atoms or any parts of those atoms and stuff like that? We're talking about infinity in the other direction as well, just as monstrous. The same defense becomes the offense. They both rely on the same oomph of truth or whatever it is. So, something's going on though. And it's not, I mean, maybe it is okay to not try to figure it out, but, you know, let's just say for a second here or longer, it's not okay to not figure it out. It's not okay to not wonder. It's not okay to not search, hypothesize. Maybe it is though, because maybe what you do with your time besides that is better for all I know. Who knows what you're up to and what that leads to and so forth, what it's worth. But entanglement's extremely interesting, and they know how to entangle the particles when they want to, for the most part. Some of people do, and it has to do with lasers and crystals and getting the particles into this entangled state. And they've entangled multiple particles together, and they're working on. They made an atomic clock, variations of atomic clocks. I think one that was so accurate, maybe it's the most accurate clock that's ever been done, or in the test, 2 different verifications of it, or something like that, and it's accurate to within a second from the creation of the universe, as they estimate it to be approximately like 13.78 billion years ago or so. If this clock started at the same time the universe did, it would have lost less than a second by now. Still, what's up with losing that second if we're talking about infinitely fast? But, you know, there you go. That's getting there, and maybe they'll entangle a lot more. Maybe they'll entangle machines, and maybe virtual reality headsets and Oculuses from the Pentagon and things will be running machines on other new von Neumann machines or other things on other planets or in other places. Who cares how far, right? Because it's entanglement. You can just do it, and you can see what's happening on the other side. Same way that a camera could send the information back through satellites and waves. So entanglement just sends back the information, which we can process by reading the other entangled particles on our end instantaneously and understanding what that implies about the other one and factoring that into their logarithms and into their minds and into their computers and quantum computers. And start creating universes, virtual realities. And really, the sky's the limit. People are going to, as they get more powerful, they're going to have to figure out maybe what the goals in life are. Because, like, yeah, we can go do that, but should we? Seems to be an ongoing quandary a lot of people face. So Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. Entanglement. Does it have to do with the fields? Or what are the fields and how do they differ from particles or energy? What is pure energy? What's up with quantum foam and particles popping in and out of existence? Really short, relatively short time frames by annihilating each other, yielding so-called 100% energy upon so-called contact. How it all plays into it, you know, the gut, the grand unified theory, or the toe, the theory of everything. But like entanglement, maybe, you know, also there's correlations between entanglement and superposition, mathematically and otherwise. And superposition being kind of like how they're not exactly sure where an object is until it's perceived, and then the wave function of its possible locations and realities collapses into or becomes or transforms into a particle state, classical physics and stuff like that. There's correlations between entanglement and that, they say. And they've been able to put particles in 2 different places, a bunch of atoms, 30 atoms it was, I think. They were able to send it up with a laser up the side of this a tube or chamber kind of thing. And then above that went, or the same atoms were like in 2 places at once. The same group of atoms were above it by a few inches as well in both places. In the physical, real world, we've been able to measure it and see that like as if they made a clone of it kind of thing or something. The universe can do anything, you know, and it wastes nothing. So, but just because maybe that relative to our finite minds, if they ultimately are or aren't, it may be difficult, doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue it or can't ultimately achieve it, or we can't team up, or we can't get lucky, or we can't at least inch our way there like maybe we have been doing for how many millennia now. But it's not something you just hear about. I think, well, you know, maybe some people do, but you hear about it and then it's like, yeah, wow. And then you walk on with your day. It's like, what's going on in a big, big way? On the double slit experiment, look into that if you haven't already, in variations of it. I've been drawing up some things a lot lately for different kinds of double slit experiments. Instead of double slits, triple slits in different shapes and different sizes and things in between them, and different variations where you use detectors and when you don't. Because, you know, every difference makes infinite differences. And so on. And you'll new hypotheses and theories and questions and so on. As you seek to look to try and dig your soul's claws or teeth into that which is true with a capital T. Get as close to that as you can, maybe forging these little T truths along the way. Like saying that's a tree or a leaf, but without ever getting trapped up and caught up in earth speak so much you're sure that that is a tree and a leaf, and only a tree and a leaf, and that it isn't indeed also an infinite number of other things. As if it doesn't have infinite other aspects, as if it isn't related and correlates with everything. Because it does, probably, is my guess, maybe. And if not, well, fine, but how do we find out? You know, let's see. And I'm not sure if it is fine or not, you know, because I don't know how we would quantify that either, necessarily, or decide that. But wild, isn't it? What if you can entangle humans? Minds, you know, telepathy across the universe. What about when you start getting E equals MC squared worked out, where it's now you can make and build things from the molecules up, from the forces up, maybe down towards the Higgs field, as they call it, and other things like that, to start manipulating that things to put the kind of right resistance into things that gain their mass and stuff, figure out how it works and play with the parts and the gears and create your freaking universes. But what for? To what end? How much suffrage would you create? How many hells would spawn as a consequence of your dreaming and your wishing and your hoping, or your accidents, or what you call your magnum opus? But how many heavens? How many smiles? How many dances? How many miles full of love and joy? And does it really make you God, or is it acting God-like to try to create universes? I don't necessarily think so. Not if we're able to do it, because if we are, it won't convince me we're God. we're just kind of been able to figure out how to tweak and so on things and stuff, and kind of notice how things are going on enough that we started doing this stuff that has to do with being huge and big planets relative to what it used to be, you know, according to most scales. And, you know, so we figured out how to look into space deeper and stuff. Good. So we figured out how to cure some diseases. Good. So we figured out how to fly for the most part, depending on how you define fly. Good. You know, maybe we should get to the point where we can have our bodies floating and flying and things like that too, and so kinds of super suits and things. But but should we? Wouldn't that depend on what our objectives are? Maybe, or maybe there doesn't need to be objectives. And if this is the case, and it's just about living for the moment, living for now, and just experiencing. And you're welcome. It's the gift of life. Like, it's gonna sting and it's gonna feel good, here and there, both, guaranteed. And that's that. And then, you know, die. It doesn't, and maybe it's not good or bad, whatever you do, or maybe it is or something, but who knows? That's the thing about free will and the finite mind, perhaps. Who knows? You get to guess. You get to heart ride. You get to make your own way. Hopefully, usually, depending on who you are. If you're chained to a wall right now, in a barn loft somewhere, you still have a lot of freedom. But the world's different for different people. I guess their experiences. It's hard to speak to everybody, you know, and get it right. Say that this applies to everybody, because, boy, the thing with exceptions is that they're out there, kind of, you know? Including maybe that there's an exception to the rule, there's an exception to every rule, for all I know, which could imply universal truth exists somewhere, or is everywhere, or both, and maybe it's contradictory, and maybe it's things like saying, well, it can't be illogical and true at the same time that are holding us back. What we call logic, what we call evidence, and so on. Interesting stuff. What exactly, at what size does quantum become classical? What's the exact scale and dimensions for distance between one edge of that side of that realm or that area and the other side? Or 2 points in other different areas of it? How much distance is in there? From this distance, how many nanometers or so on, or whatever shit is? Wide is that area where now these things are no longer necessarily quantum, with all these seemingly, or a lot of counterintuitive things not being right, according to classical physics. Like, they can be in two places at once. Things can, like, be in a superposition. The cat's neither alive nor dead. That's quantum stuff. Just the small, when you get out into the microcosms and the small places, there's new rules you're gonna have to build your quantum computers by, buddies. Having to do with probability and guessing and the uncertainty principle, and a lot of other things. Gödel's incompleteness theorem, and so on. But, and then the quantum, or the classical, you know, here's that, looking around, we have these things, you know, this thing's going to fall this way, straight down kind of thing, they say, you know, and so on, and this repetition way, and, so when does that switch? Or what? What about that point where they meet? Where's the point where they both meet? In equal attributes, in equal properties, in equal characteristics. It's now definitely quantum, and it's definitely classical. Maybe quantum and classical are the same thing, and there is no magical point if they are. And it's all gradients along the way, from eternity to go to eternity now, or from a starting point on going to a finish point if there is one, or to eternity from there if there was a starting point, if there was a creation, if there was a beginning. How does time play into it? What is time? Information, gravity, matter, all of it maybe plays into it. That's why they talk about the gut or the toe, the grand unified theory, or the theory of everything. Is kind of like more or less the holy grail, so to speak, of physics and so forth. But of philosophers, of life, of people, and, you know, how many chimpanzees looked up the stars and thought, what are those? How many cavemen, and so on, or so-called cavemen. Maybe you'll figure it out if you will, huh? If you will.